Schopenhauer, The World as Will and Representation. 1. Schopenhauer's philosophical background and influence. Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, was a German thinker who introduced a new way of understanding the world. He believed that humans are not driven by logical thinking, but by will, an idea that later influenced Nietzsche, Freud, and philosophers who focused on human existence. When he was young, he traveled across Europe and saw the terrible events of the French Revolution and the tragic deaths of enslaved people on slave ships. These experiences shaped his skeptical view of life and human nature. Rejecting the popular way of thinking in German universities at the time, which was led by Hegel, Schopenhauer created his own unique way of understanding the world. He divided reality into two parts: the world as representation in our minds and the world as will. His ideas were influenced by Kant and Plato. However, during his lifetime, most people ignored his philosophy because German thinkers were more interested in Hegel's ideas, which focused on human reason. Schopenhauer once tried to teach at the University of Berlin, but very few students attended his lectures. This discouraged him, so he gave up teaching and moved to Frankfurt, where he lived in isolation, focusing only on studying and writing. Over time, more people began to recognize his ideas, and by the 1850s, he started to receive public attention. Today, we will explore Schopenhauer's thoughts on human nature, the causes of suffering, and ways to overcome suffering through his most famous book, The World as Will and Representation. 2. The World as Representation and its Underlying Will. In The World as Will and Representation, 1818, Schopenhauer famously wrote, "The world is my representation." This means that the world we experience is shaped by the way we see and understand things, and we can never know the world as it truly is. Similar to Kant's idea that there is a difference between the real thing and what we experience, Schopenhauer divided the world into the world as representation in our minds and the world as will. Expanding on Kant's theory, Schopenhauer argued that the true essence of the world is not reason, but will. The representation we see of the world is just how we experience it. But beneath this surface, there is an invisible, unstoppable force: will. His argument that the world is not a fixed, independent reality, but something shaped by human understanding, and that it is controlled by will, was a revolutionary idea in philosophy. He emphasized that because our way of seeing the world is always limited, what we experience is not the real world. Schopenhauer believed that human understanding follows a structured principle that helps explain four fundamental aspects of existence: being, knowledge, change, and action. This principle, which he derived from Kant's philosophy, is known as the principle of sufficient reason. Schopenhauer emphasized that because our understanding is shaped by these principles, we do not see the world as it truly is, but only as it appears through the limits of our perception. This aligns with his division of the world into representation, how we perceive things, and will, the underlying uncontrolled force behind everything. 3. The purposeless nature of will. For Schopenhauer, Wille, is the invisible force that makes everything exist and move. It is the inner energy of life and the basic force of nature. He believed the universe is shaped by a blind, purposeless will that expresses itself through objects, plants, animals, and people. This will has no clear goal, yet it constantly moves human life and the world forward, creating endless desires and suffering. When a person satisfies one desire, another desire immediately appears, leading to an endless cycle. If the will does not give people what they expect, they suffer. If it does, they feel temporary happiness, followed by boredom, which then creates new desires. Because of this, human life constantly moves back and forth between suffering and boredom, like a swinging clock. 4. The human body as a combination of representation and will. The world as representation in our minds is the world we can experience. It exists within time and space. However, beyond this representation is the world as will, which we cannot directly see. Humans experience will directly through their bodies. Feelings like hunger, pain, and desires are not just physical responses, but expressions of will through the body. This means that while we understand the world through mental representations, we also live under the power of will. When you feel hungry, you perceive it as a sensation, an experience that you can describe. You might say, "I am hungry. My stomach is empty. I need food." You understand hunger through your conscious mind, interpreting it as a signal from your body. It becomes an object of your perception, something that exists within the world of representation, the world as we see and understand it. But beneath this representation, there is something more fundamental at work, something unseen yet deeply present. This is will. Hunger is not just a feeling, it is the manifestation of will, the primal force that drives all life. It is not rational, nor does it wait for our conscious approval. It compels us, pushing us forward. When you are hungry, you don't simply decide to eat. You must eat. This is the will to live, an unstoppable force that operates within us all. And here's the troubling part. Even when hunger is satisfied, it does not disappear forever. The satisfaction is temporary. Soon enough, hunger returns, and the cycle begins again. This, Schopenhauer argues, is the essence of human existence. We are trapped in an endless loop, the cycle of desire, satisfaction, and boredom. This pendulum of suffering and boredom is what defines human life. So what is the lesson here? Schopenhauer believed that if we wish to escape this cycle, we must recognize the tyranny of will over our lives. He argued that true peace comes not from satisfying every desire, but from renouncing them altogether. To live without constantly chasing after fleeting satisfactions, to recognize hunger as not just a bodily need, but as the force of will itself. This, for Schopenhauer, is the first step toward true wisdom. Because humans cannot fully understand will, they only experience small parts of it through their bodies. This means that human behavior is not always under conscious control, but is often shaped by will. Schopenhauer disagreed with traditional philosophy that separated the mind and body. He argued that physical and mental experiences cannot be divided and that the body is an expression of the mind. Rejecting rationalist ideas, Schopenhauer claimed that human actions are not based on logical thinking, but on will. He believed people do not make careful, logical decisions, but act on feelings and then use reason afterward to explain their choices. This idea later influenced Freud's theory of the unconscious. He argued that reason is not the main force behind human thinking, but just a tool to justify feelings and desires. People may believe they act rationally, but their actions are actually controlled by hidden will. 5. The veil of Maya. Schopenhauer compared human perception to the Hindu idea of the veil of Maya, which means illusion. In Hindu philosophy, the world as we see it is Maya, or an illusion. He argued that people mistakenly believe in a meaningful and structured reality, when, in truth, they are caught in a web of illusion created by their own desires. Although life is full of suffering, people cling to it, fearing death and seeking temporary pleasures. They react emotionally to external events, believing that good events bring happiness and bad events bring misery. However, Schopenhauer insisted that will itself is indifferent to individual suffering. Schopenhauer distinguished between knowledge that is controlled by will and knowledge that is free from will. Most people are trapped in the world of illusions, suffering because their emotions are constantly changing. Recognizing that will is blind impulse helps a person reduce its control. To gain knowledge free from will, Schopenhauer said that people must understand that constant suffering is a basic part of all life. Holding on to the hope that suffering will end only prevents true freedom from will. 6. The principle of individuation and human selfishness. Schopenhauer explained another reason why humans suffer, the principle of individuation, principium individuationis. This means that people see themselves as separate from others and focus only on their personal needs and desires. Even though all humans come from the same will, this principle makes individuals see themselves as different and separate, which leads to selfishness. Because of this, people often compete with each other and cause suffering in society. When one person insists on their own desires, it often harms someone else. The more a person clings to their individuality, the more they try to push their will forward, even if it negatively affects others. Hurting another person's will is considered an unfair act. Schopenhauer believed that both the person causing harm and the person being harmed are victims of the purposeless will. Someone who makes others suffer is also suffering under the control of will. He believed that true morality comes from compassion, Mitleid, which means understanding that all people experience suffering. When people realize that everyone is struggling with suffering, they naturally feel empathy and want to help others. Schopenhauer argued that human nature is naturally selfish because of individuation, and this is the root cause of social problems. When people understand that others are not so different from them, conflicts start to disappear. Overcoming individuation allows people to feel others' pain as their own and live a more ethical life. 7. The illusion of free will. Schopenhauer did not believe in free will. He argued that it is just an illusion. He believed that human actions are completely shaped by their character and surroundings. People think they are making free choices, but in reality, they are controlled by will. Humans believe they act based on their personal decisions, but they are actually driven by unconscious desires. This idea later influenced Freud's psychoanalysis, which studies the hidden motivations behind human behavior. Schopenhauer thought that a person's character is unchangeable, and every choice they make is already decided by their personality and life situation. For example, a person may think they are making a completely independent decision, but in reality, that decision is the result of their nature and environment. Because of this, Schopenhauer argued that free will does not truly exist. People do not really control their actions. They are just following the unstoppable force of will. 8. Schopenhauer's interpretation of Plato's ideas. Schopenhauer's idea of ideas, ideon, comes from Plato's theory of forms, eidos. In Plato's philosophy, forms are the perfect versions of things, but for Schopenhauer, ideas are the highest and purest expressions of will. He believed that ideas are the clearest representations of will and show its main characteristics. While ordinary people stay trapped in the world of appearances, philosophers, artists, and deep thinkers can see ideas directly. For Schopenhauer, understanding ideas helps people go beyond ordinary experience and see the true nature of will. This special way of seeing things can lead to freedom from suffering. Artists play an important role in this process because their work allows others to experience ideas, even if only for a short time. Among the different forms of art, Schopenhauer thought music was the most special. He believed music was the purest expression of will, helping people escape suffering for a moment. His ideas about art influenced later movements like Romanticism and existentialist philosophy. 9. The ultimate solution to suffering: the negation of will and an ascetic life. Schopenhauer believed that the best way to escape suffering was to negate, reject the will. This is similar to the Buddhist idea of nirvana, which means letting go of desires and stopping the constant push of will. He argued that true peace and happiness can only come from giving up desires and living a simple, self-controlled life. This is not just a moral idea, it requires deep thinking and understanding of life. Some practical ways to reject the will include reducing personal desires and living simply, avoiding too much pleasure and instead focusing on deep understanding of life, practicing compassion, Mitleid, and realizing that all living beings share the same suffering. Schopenhauer saw art, philosophy, and ethical behavior as important tools to help people escape the power of will. He believed that stepping away from unnecessary desires and looking at life from a broader perspective was essential for finding peace. More than just controlling desires, Schopenhauer argued for a complete rejection of will itself. This was not just about moderation, but a total change in how one views life and suffering. 10th philosophical reflection on death. Schopenhauer did not see death as just the end of an individual, but as part of a larger process. While individual people disappear, will continues to exist and appear in new forms. If people realize that they are simply temporary expressions of will, they will stop fearing death. Since life and death are part of the same cycle, accepting death as a natural event is the best way to understand it. Schopenhauer thought that people fear death because they are trapped by individuation, believing they are separate and unique beings. But this is just an illusion. Since humans are only temporary appearances of will, their disappearance does not mean the end of will itself. To overcome the fear of death, Schopenhauer suggested adopting a viewpoint that rejects will. By letting go of attachments and desires, people can rise above their individuality and accept death as a natural part of life. 11th, the modern relevance of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Schopenhauer challenged the traditional belief that humans are guided by reason and free will. Instead, he described humans as beings controlled by hidden desires and impulses. He believed life is an endless cycle of wanting and suffering. His ideas are connected to existentialist philosophy, psychoanalysis, and Buddhist teachings. They offer a method to reduce suffering and find peace by rejecting unnecessary desires. Schopenhauer questioned optimistic views of the world and explained human existence through the ideas of will and suffering. His philosophy has had a deep influence on modern thought and psychology. Since suffering is a natural part of life, Schopenhauer believed that people must find ways to reduce it. He argued that to escape suffering, humans need to control their desires and see life from a broader perspective. His ideas also helped shape psychoanalysis. Freud expanded on Schopenhauer's ideas by focusing on the hidden forces that drive human behavior. Furthermore, Schopenhauer's ideas are similar to Buddhist teachings, especially the idea of impermanence, anicca. He believed that letting go of attachments and desires leads to true peace, much like Buddhist enlightenment. Schopenhauer's philosophy is not just abstract theory, it offers a practical approach to life. His insights into suffering and detachment continue to be relevant, providing timeless guidance on how to live wisely and peacefully. I hope today's video has provided a small but meaningful reflection for your life. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments.